If you're in a dispute with your employer in the UK, I want to address a really common misconception and one word that gets used that I think incorrectly used that can really make a difference to how you get that situation resolved. And most people just don't know about it. And that word is final. So what do I mean by that? When you have a dispute at work, you and your employer are required by the tribunals, the legislation to try and resolve it internally. That's called an internal process. And that internal process is governed by what's called the AASS Code of Practice for disciplinaries and grievances. It's like the rule book for how you can complain and when you should complain and what your employer has to do if you do raise a complaint. And one of the key things in there is that you can raise a complaint, your employer has to look at it within a reasonable amount of time, and they also have to give you the right to an appeal. Now, if you did raise an appeal and they still looked into it and said, we don't think there's anything wrong here, they could send you a letter back that says, this is the final decision, the final conclusion. But that's the final conclusion to the internal process, not the conclusion to what you can actually do, what your options are. I think a lot of people just stop there because they've given it a go. They've raised the complaint, they even appealed. That was a big deal. And then to see the word final, to see that, this is it, this is closed, the matter is now closed. Well, I gave it my best. I guess I'll just go without that money or deal with whatever that problem was. And then they just feel like they have to give up. But that's not what the system has been built to allow people to do. You have the ability to escalate that issue. And let me talk through what your escalation points are. Next escalation point is something called AASS Early Conciliation. Now, AASS is a third body that has been set up to help employers and employees resolve differences, resolve conflicts. It's designed for past that appeal point where people can say, like, look, they said it was final, I don't agree, so I would like to try and, reach some kind of conclusion with them. And if that doesn't work, you can then escalate again to the employment tribunal. Only when the tribunal rules, or even if one was to appeal, the employment appeal tribunal rules, that it actually becomes final. So when that word gets used back at like a grievance appeal or a disciplinary appeal or something like that, it is absolutely not true that it is final. But there are some key things that you have to keep in mind if you're in a dispute that means that you keep these options open and it doesn't become final before you want it to. Absolutely critical thing is that you're aware of your AASS early conciliation deadlines. So let's say that a problem arose at work and you raised a grievance about it and your employer takes some time to look at the grievance and they come back to you 2 months later, for example, and they say, we don't think we did anything wrong here. You might just be tempted to appeal, see what happens, and hope for the best. But you only have 3 months minus 1 day after the bad thing happened to raise an early conciliation issue via AASS to preserve your ability to take it to tribunal if you need to. You might be saying, Danae, I don't want to take it to tribunal. That's fine, but you want the ability to potentially take it to tribunal because your employer does not want you to have to go to tribunal. They don't want to have to pay the legal fees. They don't want the fuss and the bother. So if you maintain that ability to go to tribunal, even if you don't intend to use it, that puts you in a better negotiating position with your employer when you're in AASS early conciliation, trying to reach some kind of resolution to the issue. So in that situation where 2 months later the employer comes back and says, we don't think that anything bad happened here, you could raise an appeal and simultaneously raise an AASS early conciliation case. Now, sometimes AASS might say, wait, why did you raise this first before going through the appeal process? And the answer is simple, because I had 3 months minus 1 day after the bad thing happened to raise an AASS early conciliation issue, and I wanted to preserve my ability to take this to tribunal if I need to. I can't control how long it takes for the employer to come back on my grievance, but I can control staying within that timeline to preserve my legal options and my legal rights. Until I'm head up about this, because this is what really irks me about it. When people use words like final and things like that, they're really not deliberately, hopefully, trying to mislead you, but they're certainly trying to close a matter down when it it doesn't have to be closed down, especially if you're within that 3 months minus 1 day window of the thing that happened. My message to all of you, anyone in the UK who is in a dispute or could be in a dispute with your employer in the future, is to listen to what your employer is saying, but make sure you know the rules of the game. So that first means know the AASS guidelines for disciplinaries and grievances, so you know how that original complaints process is supposed to work, how those internal processes are supposed to work, and then know what your options are outside of that. Understand AASS early conciliation, and then understand if you did have to take it to tribunal, what would that mean? And the quick way of doing that is to just keep following us here on this channel, but also AASS has tons of great information on their website as well. So yes, final doesn't have to mean final.